David, welcome to the show.
Good to be with you, Jason.
How are you feeling there in Canada today, David?
A lot of adrenaline flowing through the system because I think events are combining to actually have the enemy show its hand more than it perhaps intended. And I think we have a role to take them apart, if that's not too threatening a term.
Well, it's been our role for some time. And, you know, David, unfortunately, viewers of Crowdsource The Truth may be missing this live broadcast as it goes out right now. Once again, the channel has come under fire. A series of malicious strikes have been basically unending for the past several years, but another one has come in this morning. So the Jason Goodman YouTube channel, unfortunately, is once again unable to live stream for the next 2 weeks. And I don't think it's a coincidence, David. These things seem to be happening in a persistent and ongoing manner. I'm not going to give any credit or even acknowledgement to the specific individuals that I believe are behind this, but it's got to be clear to our viewers by now, David, that it just doesn't make sense that I can't believe that someone would be so dedicated to the destruction of what it is that we're trying to do for 3 years. People who think that we're talking about nonsense, or they don't like me, or they don't like you, or they don't believe what we say. Why wouldn't they just turn it off and go watch something else?
Because I believe on the social network theory, they are participants in an exercise intended to shut Crowdsource The Truth down and basically deny me not the fruits of my work, but because my main goal is actually, I try to investigate and use someone like you with your skills to illuminate. I mean, this is complex stuff, complicated stuff. And I woke up this morning with this phrase that jumped into my mind of an online criminal insurgency run by an online judicial elite. And in the image that you show there, there's one of them, right? Who this is a would-be or wannabe lawyer who probably has about 6 allegations, credible allegations of rape that date back to his time at Oxford University when he was kicked out or expelled after a year of doing philosophy, politics, and economics. And you know how I can ramble on, but that's a degree that I deem to be the generator of people who are scientifically and technically illiterate, right?
Yes.
If you study philosophy, politics, and economics, you're really studying the techniques used by politicians, right, to run economies to their own benefit very often, and basically have the philosophy behind it to peddle their theories to the public at large, which gets sucked in.
But let me ask you this, David. Isn't he more than just a wannabe lawyer? I mean, Bill Clinton actually was a lawyer. He had to give up his law license in a settlement of a civil legal case, I believe. I think this was it with, what was her name? How could I be forgetting her name? Bill Clinton versus...
the woman Monica Lewinsky?
No. It wasn't Monica Lewinsky. It was at the time of the Monica Lewinsky scandal. People in the chat are going to know who I'm talking about. It was, Charles would know her name. It's on the tip of my tongue. She was represented by a team that included one of the lawyers who's involved in the lawsuits against me, Paula Jones.
But anyway, so going back to the terminology that I think might be useful for the listeners to understand, I believe there is an online criminal insurgency that, and let's just say, let's make it easier for people to understand, that we could tentatively call the Phantom, right? Because the Phantom Secure Criminal Network was set up in Canada at Richmond, British Columbia, which is a short hop to the offices of McDonald Detweiler, which we'll come to in a minute, right? And it managed to procure or obtain, through whatever techniques that we might discuss, the services of the head of intelligence of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, a man by the name of Cameron Ortis.
I don't mean to interject, David, but I know your enthusiasm for sharing this information often exceeds all else. But I want to make sure that people know this is the topic we're going to be discussing on the sponsor exclusive segment of the show. And I want to spend a little bit more time just talking to people about how important it has now become for people to become sponsors on patreon.com/reverse CSI storyboards. And people can also sponsor you now, David, on subscribestar.com/reverse CSI. And I say that not just because I personally require money to buy food and remain alive and stuff like that, but I also want you to be able to do the same and benefit from the work that we do together. And I also want people to understand what's going on. This online criminal insurgency that you're talking about, this social engineering operation, we've heard other people talk about it as IIA, interactive internet activity, variety of different things. It's in this particular case that I'm talking about, it is engineered to destroy Crowdsource the Truth and prevent not only your message, but the message that every other guest and co-host wants to bring to our viewers. So long ago, David, I devised this method that distributes the sponsorship, distributes the compensation. I'm not responsible for paying anyone. It's the viewers who decide if they want to watch. They can sponsor the show and it continues. But all of this activity of shutting down the YouTube channel and accusing me of whether it's copyright infringement or whatever it might be, it's intended to suppress what we're doing here. And it's not an accident. It's phantom actors.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I want to dedicate the Patreon part of the show to offering my ideas of what legal remedies might be available to our Patreon supporters. I'm quite, other than the support I get from Patreon sponsors, I'm quite ready to write myself out of any pecuniary gain if any of these actions bring down what I just deem to be an online criminal insurgency. But if we, and I don't think there are many people actually working in the way in which you and I work, with our Patreon supporters, I think if we fail to bring down this online criminal insurgency, this represents an existential threat to the survival of the Republic, because this online criminal insurgency has been operating, I believe now, although the technology changed, I believe that now I can take it back to online judicial elites, back to the assassination of JFK. So, and even to World War II, where operations are put together, what are called double cross operations, with a very significant input from online judicial elites back in World War II, right? Including the man who put together the famous Operation Mincemeat, who was a lawyer, I believe, in the City of London. I forget which law firm he worked for. And his name just escapes me, but someone will, I'm sure, will dig it up. So the industry of law or judicial manipulation or adjustment is as old as Charles Dickens, if not earlier, that the law firms, they come in and the lawyers come in. For example, the biggest law firm in the world, Clifford Chance, put together the administration of the Cecil Rhodes Scholarship, has apologized for slavery, right? Its role in the slavery.
Right.
So you can see this is a pedigree that goes back a long, long way. So I believe there are two individuals that I will focus on during the Patreon part of the show, and to a certain extent this. One is a lawyer, right? When I say a wannabe lawyer, I believe his career basically took him into a conflict with the basic philosophy of law or jurisprudence in a manner that actually lends credibility to the possibility that he's corrupted it. Anyway, I digress. The other is a Canadian lawyer, right, who I believe was instrumental in sloughing off the public key infrastructure arm of Nortel, right, into what is known as a virtual private network that was accessed by Huawei, the Chinese conglomerate. And I think by the time we get through some major crimes of the 1990s, Huawei had taken over, would you believe, the JABS program developed by Nortel Government Solutions for the Department of Justice, where it was tracking prisoners and parolees through the prison system. And if we go back to your opening image there, what we see is a picture of the JPATS plane JPATS being Justice, Prisoner, Alien, and Transportation System, which in 1994 was combined with the Bureau of Prisons Prisoner Transportation System and the Federal Marshal's Transportation System, using those kind of planes, which conveniently offer the mob the opportunity to throw someone that they disagree with.
Now, wait a second. Slow down. David, doing a show with you is a bit like trying to ride a rodeo horse, because you go off in this direction and there's a sort of an order in which we want to discuss this stuff. So the image, of course, is of a JPATS plane. And the reason why I selected this image, and I'm glad that you began talking about it, but I just want to lay a few things out. This is 727, David. And we've spoken about that particular aircraft so many times that I think it's very important that we talk about what's going on here. This is, now I've modified this photo a bit in that I used a higher resolution image of a 727. So if people see this online, these prisoners are from a JPATS photo and they are walking onto a 727 plane up through the rear door here, but it was clipped off, so I used a different plane. But the point is, this is the 727 that was acquired, according to Phil McConnell, who we don't know if he's accurate or not, but by Christine Marcy after a conversation that they had, and it is quite noteworthy that it is a 727 with a rear door. You've spoken quite a bit, David, about the theoretical concept that JPATS, the Joint Prisoner and Alien Transportation System, colloquially known as Con Air, could be used to deploy teams, whether they be convicts or whatever. We've seen the website offering business opportunities. We're aware that this 727 aircraft is considered by pilots and aviation experts to be remarkably stable at low speeds. And if it were to slow down to a speed just above its stall speed and reduce altitude to 15,000 feet, you could drop parachuters, equipment, bombs, all kinds of things out that rear door.
You could even do a bit of crop spraying, right?
Right.
Now, yes, so go back. So I believe the online criminal insurgency requires at least two key technologies to be able to put on a virtual private network at a crime scene and control the outcome of that crime scene, right? So now, this introduction of the three strikes laws by the Clinton administration in 1993, I believe, offers an incredible opportunity, right, to extort or blackmail prisoners into doing something they might not otherwise want to do because, for example, if the judicial elite deem them to have committed on the third offense a felonious, violent attack on someone, including a guard in the jail, they're looking at life imprisonment.
Yes. Now, let's back that up for a second again, because again, David, you and I have a lot of offline conversations where we sort of put these spikes in the ground, these flags in the turf that viewers might not be fully up to speed yet. So the three strikes law was implemented by Bill Clinton, and it was part of his crime bill, right, that he has since basically said was a disaster. We've heard a lot of people, including that documentary the 13th, talk about how this crime bill essentially decimated minority families, particularly black families, by using methods that you're about to describe for us to target individuals or to potentially target individuals, to just put them in jail and criminalize basically anything, even the smallest offense. If you could get someone on marijuana possession twice and then put them in jail and get them in some sort of a jailhouse fight, where in defending their lives, they commit felony assault or some sort of violent crime. You've now taken someone who is essentially a nonviolent, criminal and turned them into a hardened felon in a desperate situation who could be manipulated in a variety of ways. And when you explain this to me, David, it occurred to me that somebody that we know may have been subjected to this treatment. Michael Barden was interviewed on this show many times when he was nervous about this prospect of accepting a plea bargain for a felony he was accused of. And somebody we know interfered with his lawyer, interfered with this process, may have played a role in Michael Barden taking that felony plea. Now Michael's options in life are restricted in that he's a convicted felon. He could be coerced into doing something he might not have done before.
And there's another individual, very famous, courtesy of the BBC, right, who had about 6 stints in jail. The last one, I believe, where he pointed a gun at a pregnant woman's belly. Right? Now think of him. Wouldn't it be interesting if he was COVID positive? Right? Because again, what you have potentially is a criminal, maybe started small time, counterfeit, who in his last attack on humanity or whatever, pointing a gun at a pregnant woman's belly, he's a black guy, of course, right? And he becomes the actor or the star, if you will, he's dead now, obviously, in the Black Lives Matter sloganeering around the world driven by the BBC. And I'm saying this is a classic example of an online criminal insurgency. Now, whether he actually was used by the insurgents or their judicial elites to spread the disease, he was capable, because the autopsy showed he was COVID positive, as identified in April, etc. He's potentially an asymptomatic carrier of COVID infections around the world, or in his particular bailiwick. And apparently he was engaged in pornography, and I don't know how you can avoid, wearing face masks, etc., and be actually liable to spread this disease amongst your partners in.
Well, that was before. He was in the porn movie before COVID. But I mean, this was amazing, David, that the medical examiner's autopsy reveals George Floyd had positive test for coronavirus. So that was June 4th. There's been, outside of this show, almost no conversation about this. And we're not implicating George Floyd in any crimes other than those he's been officially charged with, but you're merely pointing out that this is a guy with a criminal record who's been through the prison system. They're telling us he had coronavirus. So was this some sort of a, was he coerced into getting involved in something that he otherwise might not have done?
Well, this comes back to the possibility of infecting selected members of the prisoner and parolee community, which incidentally, from Clinton's introduction of the 3 strikes law, from memory, I think there were 91,000 federal prisoners. But X years later, I think closer to the present, there are 220,000 criminal prisoners. Now, wouldn't that form an extraordinary base for an online criminal insurgency where people are threatened with life imprisonment because their 3rd sentence has been deemed to be by some member of an online judicial elite, such as Kamala Harris, right, who was Attorney General in California and was a notorious promoter of this 3-strike techniques. Because what I'm saying, the lawyers amongst them have the power to take the prison population and radicalize it or weaponize it. And they've got the means to transport through JPATs anywhere in the world people into a crime scene. And more particularly, they have the technology of JABS, Joint Automated Booking System, which was the subject of a Gore Hammer Award at a meeting in the Great Hall of Justice of 1996, that would allow you to book modified or asymptomatic prisoners.
Let's keep to bite-sized pieces for a second, David, because you're laying down so much. I want to make sure people are getting it. So this 3 strikes law, it was implemented by Bill Clinton, and we can see from this United States federal prison population chart that shortly after, I mean, there was already an increase happening from 1980 to 1990, which I think we should look at what George H.W. Bush and his friends had in mind for a privatization of the prison system. But certainly his protege, Bill Clinton, sent it skyrocketing to where it continued through 2010 to just, go from under 30,000, it looks like, incarcerated Americans to over 200,000. Really a dramatic increase. And Bill Clinton, as reported by the BBC, regrets the 3 strikes bill. But this is decades later, and the damage has been done. Communities have been destroyed, lives have been destroyed, children have grown up without parents, countless people murdered in jailhouse fights. And, what do you think about all this?
Well, then we have to ascribe it to either incompetence or malice aforethought. I believe Bill Clinton and an online judicial elite decided that they wanted to create an online criminal insurgency for the purposes of attacking the very fundamentals of a particular group of countries known as the Five Eyes countries. Right? The Five Eyes countries grew out of the Second World War. During the war, they used the technology known as a combined communication electronics board for the United Kingdom and the United States to work together. That same terminology, Jason, exists on the Federal Bridge. We've seen that multiple times. So what I believe these two countries would do, shortly after the war, Australia, New Zealand, and Canada joined in. And of course, these would be the targets, the classical targets, for the people who lost World War I and World War II. Well, in particular, World War II, the Axis powers under Hitler, and Japan. So one has to make the argument, did the people who lost the war, if I may say so, during the Second World War, maybe in Korea as well, decide the only way to undermine the Five Eyes countries is get into their signals intelligence networks with an online criminal insurgency and start taking apart the countries, the Five Eyes countries, in a way that we see today, where the economies of Australia, Canada, the United Kingdom, the United States, and New Zealand are being decimated is the wrong word, but they're down GNP by 30 or 40%. Meanwhile, the people are sitting at home getting various forms of contribution or cash. How long can a country survive such as that? I mean, you're undermining the ability of the taxpayer to pay taxes, and you're subsidizing your friends in the hope of winning the next election, I guess. Over to you.
And it's not even stopping at that. One of the most important things that you raised in our conversation yesterday, David, that's going to be another focus of today's topic when we transition over to the sponsor-exclusive segment on Patreon and Subscribestar, where we really need people to join us there. There is an incredibly focused effort. I can't even go into detail about what's going on to try to destroy Crowdsource the Truth, because it will reveal elements of the countermeasures that we're attempting to employ. But one of the most important things that you're going to discuss, David, and this was just reported a couple of weeks ago in Bloomberg, so to the extent that people don't listen to us and listen to something like this, we're going to talk about how the possibility of a Chinese hack may have killed Canada's greatest tech company. Now, this article is talking about how Huawei may have stolen Canada's 5G edge from Nortel. You intend to go into some detail about Nortel and Huawei and your thoughts about what may be going on between those two countries. Can you give everybody just a brief insight into where we're going with this?
Yeah, absolutely. 1989, 1990, Huawei emerged with the help of the founder, who's a former technologist, information technologist with the People's Liberation Army of China. His daughter is waiting for extradition out of Canada into the United States, where Huawei faces a RICO charge for serial thefts of intellectual property in a court in Brooklyn, which I think is going to be a major lever for us to bring down this conspiracy. But backing up, so in 1989, Huawei starts importing Nortel kit from Hong Kong and then reverse engineering it, right, and manufacturing it. So by the mid-1990s, I mean, Americans really don't understand, if I may say so, I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude, the danger, because what Nortel did, it outsourced its manufacturing to Huawei in Mexico, right? So Huawei was doing two things. It was reverse engineering the Nortel kit and jumping ahead of the development curve, because not only did Nortel outsource manufacture, it outsourced project or product development. So I believe when Nortel sold JABS, Joint Automated Booking System, to track prisoners through the Department of Justice, that service was provided by Huawei, offering an incredible man-in-the-middle opportunity to attack the United States through the prison population, a radicalized prison population, courtesy of Bill Clinton. So what you saw, I think, in the various crimes I'm alleging, including the murder of John Benet Ramsey, the siege of Waco, where 24 black British adults and children were murdered by a hit team, basically deployed through the Department of Justice. And I think I know who actually deployed them, but that might be a digression. The Oklahoma City bombing, right? The attack on the U.S. embassies in Dar es Salaam and Nairobi, where they were simultaneous explosions, apparently. On the 7th of August, 1998, 4 days after the BBC applied for a patent for its spoken text display apparatus. But
and the day of your birthday.
For a moment. Sorry?
And the day of your
birthday.
But again, I'm reeling you back like a giant fish going almost too fast for the boat to keep up with. But the point that I want people to stay focused on, and David, this isn't a criticism. This is just an acknowledgement of your style. Your brain is like a fire hose. And when we start talking, it's like everything is shooting out and people are getting soaked by it. And I want to make sure that this glass of water can be fully consumed by our audience. Because anytime this happens to me, I presume there must be at least one person out there who it's happening to as well. We're not necessarily talking about anything that you haven't mentioned before, but the pieces, for me at least, have now sufficiently come together where I want to make sure I understand what's being explained, and I want to do it in a way that hopefully everyone will be able to follow us. So JABS is the Joint Automated Booking System, which is used by the Department of Justice to book and track the location of federal prisoners. Is that correct?
Correct.
Okay. So this is an article from Washington Today from December 8th, 2000, talking about how Nortel, the Canadian telecom company, sets up a virtual private network at the United States Department of Justice, and it's expanding to each individual state. This is a VPN that Nortel of Brampton, Ontario built for the Justice Department that allows the agency to share criminal profile information, including fingerprints, photographs, biological data, and arrest records using an application called the Joint Automated Booking System. So this is amazing. This is the Department of Justice, one of the most powerful agencies in the U.S. government, relying on a foreign firm, a Canadian firm, to develop a system that controls everything, all this information about prisoners. And we've seen the Department of Justice running wild in the United States, criminalizing everybody from Roger Stone to Jerome Corsi, now Steve Bannon, and even the President of the United States himself attempting to do that, Michael Flynn, of course. And so what they do is once they force you into this system, you're now being recorded and your data is being handled on this virtual private network that's maintained by a contractor, not the government. And the contractor could have all kinds of people working for them. And not to mention, this contractor isn't even a U.S. contractor, Nortel. And shortly after all this, it's acquired by a Chinese company that President Donald Trump now wants to essentially ban from the United States entirely, Huawei. So the Chinese government essentially controls a database of every prisoner in the United States of America, their biological data, if and when they've been vaccinated, what their sicknesses are, what their weaknesses are, what kind of medication they may or may not need. And this is all happening in reasonably close time proximity to Bill Clinton introducing a bill that has basically quadrupled the prison population and created a rich, vast resource pool, for them to pull from. Am I approximately correct in my evaluation of that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. Now, Nortel was not acquired by Huawei. What Huawei did is reverse engineer Nortel's switchboards, etc., starting by importing Nortel kit from Hong Kong, right? Importing it into China, reverse engineering it, and ultimately, possibly through a variety of techniques, extorting Nortel directors, and I'll give you a name, you already know the name, extorting a group of Nortel directors, right, into handing off manufacture of Nortel kit into Huawei in Mexico, right? and, it would appear, manufacturing product or service development at Nortel over to Huawei. So I believe Huawei developed the joint automated booking system to track the prison population in the United States, right? And what that means, of course, combined with JPATS, is they can deploy a crime group. There's a film called The Dirty Dozen, right, where they talk about people on death row, and the film is modeled on, I think they call them the Filthy 13, which is a group of prisoners in World War II that were actually deployed behind enemy lines to sabotage because they have the skills. Now, the people in the business of warfare, like a couple of the generals that I'll come to, right, one very well known to Clinton, know exactly how dangerous it is and where the skill sets are necessary if you are, for example, going to blow up the Oklahoma City Murrah building, right? Or bring the Twin Towers down and then building number 7. So you need very often to go into the ex-military or the prisoner-based community to find the people who have the skill sets necessary to go in and scare the hell out of a sovereign power, a sovereign state, for example, by crashing its planes, the 2 Malaysian airline planes, for example, or the Boeing 737 MAX 8 aircraft. So what we're looking at really is come back to the online judicial elite. These are the people who can put these complex situations together where the outcome of the crime scene investigations is deflected by master propagandists, right, like the BBC. And so the public goes looking over here for the criminals that are over here, quite possibly stored or inventoried in the prison system in the Five Eyes countries, right, where a company we know very well provides a custody and escort service in the Five Eyes countries. And that company, of course, is called Serco. So we've got not just Nortel theoretically providing the joint automated booking system, but the reality is Huawei, right through the 1998 bombings of the East African embassies, the bombing of the US Cole in Aden Harbor, and the 9/11 attacks, is providing the joint automated booking system service to the United States Department of Justice, which I believe constitutes what I would describe as state capture. Over to you.
Spanman is telling us that the Hells Angels have some elite squad called the Filthy Few. Are you aware of that, David?
No, I'm not. And, when the Hells Angels describe it as elite, I mean, I'm talking about
added that.
Yeah. You see, I'm talking about a global elite, right? The kinds of people who operate at the top level of the judicial community, attorney generals, and the people, the prosecutors and the defendants. Defendants can throw cases. Prosecutors can throw cases. So people who should be in jail are not, and people who are not in jail are in jail who shouldn't be.
That's the key to this whole system, is keeping people they don't want in jail out and putting people they do want in. We see that happening now. I don't know if Steve Bannon is guilty or innocent. He's pled not guilty, but it certainly seems like anybody who even knows Donald Trump is in danger of going to jail or getting a criminal charge brought against them just so that they can basically at the election say, oh, look at this, he must be a criminal. Everybody he knows is being charged with crimes. And likewise, people look at the Clintons and say they must be innocent because no charges have been brought.
Exactly. So now, because of this shift in the dynamics of the people who are lined against you and your fellow guests and myself, I believe we need to start explaining, and that'll be in the next part of the show, what kind of remedies are available to people like you and my fellow guests on your show and the Patreon supporters. And it does require, and I'll emphasize that the Patreon supporters understand the power they potentially have, and I'm not being excessively arrogant here, by listening to us as we thread this argument together. What I just described, the infiltration of the prison system by Huawei, and then, of course, you need to know who infiltrated Huawei, and I'm back to the British, right, is the threat that represents to the survival of the Republic, right? There was a major attempt to overthrow the government, I believe, on 9/11. It failed, but they've now developed even more sophisticated techniques, and let me mention one of them. The Clinton Foundation, founded in 1997, that was the same year the movie Con Air came out, and there are no coincidences. This is a classic example, I believe, of propaganda where Elmer Davis, who was a Rhodes Scholar, the head of the War Information Office in World War II, who employed, I believe, Bill de Blasio's mother on his staff, right? He said the way to propagandize the public is to insert the propaganda into entertainment media so the public doesn't even realize it's being propagandized. Now, what did the movie Con Air convey to people, the public? You know, it's a great movie. It was fun. It was an adventure. But how did that guy, Nicolas Cage, get into jail? He basically was defending his girlfriend.
Yeah, his girlfriend.
And he killed a couple of guys. There's the words, could happen to anyone, right? He ends up in this system, and then he's transported around in the Con Air plane, which is the equivalent of JPATS, right?
But I forgot the premise of the movie, David. Wasn't it that they were just trying to take him to jail and the plane crashed, and he somehow becomes a hero of the plane crash?
Well, exactly. He's a good guy that's caught up in this, let's say, online criminal insurgency, if you will, unwittingly, but he's a good guy. He was defending his girlfriend, right? On the plane.
And I think he was a soldier, wasn't he? Like a...
Yes, he was. He was. So there you created some archetypes. Maybe that's not right. You know, people who work in the military and become vets, you know, and they have a certain code of honor in the Marines or whatever, or the Rangers, right? They believe that they're doing what is a service to humanity and the American Republic. They get caught up in this system and they get trapped. Maybe it's been a felonious and violent assault that was totally justified in the circumstances. But now the online judicial elite is threatening them with life imprisonment. So I would say people like in the fiction Nicolas Cage in the film become targets for extortion and blackmail, where they're told, if you don't do what you're told to do, remember the BBC injunction on the outside, listen and obey, you're going to have a life imprisonment, right? So maybe Julian Assange in the UK at that prison, the original allegation was rape of a couple of Swedish girls.
Well, right.
So, right. So now he's in jail, right? But he, I believe,
but not
was a whistleblower.
There was a lot of strange things about that. The women said they didn't accuse him of that. It relied on some obscure law in Sweden. And but the point is taken, David, that once you can be gotten into this judicial system where you're under the thumb, we hear about this all the time. There was just an FBI lawyer who pled guilty to a federal crime. He's going to lose his law license, going to lose his ability to get a decent job. I mean, even if the guy spends only 6 months in jail or no time in jail, just pleading to that felony, all the time that guy spent in law school, he's a pretty young guy. He's probably counting on having a good and successful life with a good job. That's all been taken away from him now. So he's just put into a position where somebody could put pressure on him where perhaps previously they couldn't, a lot like Michael Barton.
And I think there are three ways where, in order to develop this technique, it would be what I would call in the artificial intelligence or product development, you need a proof of concept, right? You need to actually take this concept of, let's say, an online judicial insurgency protected by an online judicial elite and try it out somewhere. And I believe I arrived in BC in 1992, and way back then, for reasons I didn't really understand, I felt that I'd landed up in the most corrupt jurisdiction on the planet. And I've worked all around the world, including in Nigeria. I couldn't put my finger on it. Sorry?
Why did you stay there?
Because I don't run. Right? To me, I was attracted to that place because although I didn't understand that it was an online judicial insurgent conspiracy, what I felt was I could do something about it simply because of my training, the introduction of new technologies and techniques. Then over the next nearly 20 years, I realized that in BC and Vancouver, they had developed the technologies for tracking prisoners and parolees and pointing them at crime scenes. One of the principal developers was McDonald Detweiler, where I think I've mentioned multiple times that I was in the office of John McDonald in 1995, trying to explore the possibility of having the company sold to the company I used to work for in England, where I could take the McDonald Detweiler technology, which includes anti-hijacking software. Now think about that. In May the 3rd of 2001, McDonald Detweiler announces it's been awarded a contract by the FAA to take control of a plane through instrument approach procedures and line it up with a final approach procedure, which describes exactly what happened on 911. So McDonald Detweiler is an example of what I believe is the proof of concept beginnings of an online criminal insurgency in BC. Secondly, we have, for example, Starnet Communications, which was raided. We had that wonderful show with the lady who actually witnessed that raid last week, I think it was, and a raid by 100 to 150 people, including allegedly Vancouver Police, RCMP, IRS, US Customs, CIA, right, and FBI.
She told us that. She said she saw CIA jackets. That's very strong first-hand testimony.
Right, which may have been actors, but anyway, whatever it was, they took away 3 floors worth of servers and files related to the Starnet business of hardcore adult and child pornography in 60 countries, together with online gaming. This was a criminal organization, right? Very deeply embedded in new technology and existing in 60 countries. Now, over in the pig farm at Port Coquitlam, you have a federally registered charity that I believe was registered to hold online sporting and entertainment events. That is to say, they were filmed out there. That is where maybe up to 100 women were slaughtered at the pig farm or at the Barnes Road. You know, we went to the site, etc., etc. So therefore, you've got Starnet and Piggy Palace Good Time Society, 2 criminal organizations, McDonald Detweiler that developed the technology for digital online data management or radio data management to track the police and the prisoners, and they sold it to Motorola, right? And Motorola was bought by Lenovo, the Chinese conglomerate. So right now what I'm saying is the technologies developed as proof of concept in BC, including Imagist technologies for facial recognition, basically proved the possibility for these people of creating an online global insurgency, right? That can actually be used through, for example, Phantom Secure, with the connivance of insiders inside the RCMP to point at city-states or sovereign governments and basically bring them to their knees through economic and asymmetric warfare. And just one last thing about Clinton before we go over. The Clinton Foundation oversaw the transition of the tainted blood trade from the Arkansas prison system in 1993 to 94. The last shipment of tainted blood that drove the AIDS and Hep C epidemics around the world, courtesy of the Clinton Foundation, was in 1994, where I'm alleging they actually transferred the tainted blood trade, included COVID-19, to JPATs. That is to say, they're transporting prisoners, this is my allegation, people like, let's say, George Floyd, into areas to infect the local community or threaten to infect the local community unless the community pays protection money, which goes into the federal bridge and basically enriches insiders. Over to you.
Well, it's an interesting theory, David, and for all of the likely social engineers or possible skeptics who think that this is just speculation, I mean, this is an article from Washington Today. This is a government trade publication that talks all about a variety of different government contracts. This is telling us back in 2008 that, as you allege, Nortel set up this joint automated booking system.
Is that 2008? I thought it was 2000.
2000, December 8th. Sorry, I misspoke. December 8th, 2000.
Very, very important, right?
Yeah.
Because that's before 911.
Right. And this article is telling us that not only did they create this database, but it is monitoring, as you said, biological information about these patients. So that would certainly include their status as far as, you know, their health or sickness, if they had COVID-19, if they had hepatitis, HIV, this thing could say, show me all the HIV positive patients that are in jail for bombing something. And now you've got a pool of people to choose from who could be coerced into doing anything.
And if I may just say so, what that article does not say, but must have been known by the corrupt or incompetent intelligence agencies that surround President Trump with misinformation, what they don't say is that by then, that is 2000, Nortel manufacturing and project development had been transferred by the lawyer, the Canadian lawyer Yves Fortier, who's a director of Nortel, I believe, to Huawei. That is to say, Huawei was completely inside the Five Eyes signals intelligence network prior to the 9/11 attack.
Right, and this is important to bring. Fortier. Yes, it's important to bring this back to Yves Fortier because, again, I mean, if I understand correctly, David, we're speculating that it's possible that these things didn't just happen by accident. There were people on the inside of some of these organizations and countries, just as we've spoken about Bill Clinton's sale or transfer of various United States military technologies to the Chinese. It does appear that there may be certain individuals operating in the corporate world who have facilitated this transfer of technology, infiltration into the United States and the Five Eyes countries. Remind me, David, is Yves Fortier a Rhodes Scholar?
Yes, very important. 1958, he is a Rhodes Scholar. He comes back to Montreal, and he's a high-flying lawyer. And in Montreal, let me see if I get these names right, Jules Kimball, Dave Ferrier, and Clay Shaw chartered planes to go to Montreal and allegedly, and this is a decoy, met with a guy called Mortimer of Permindex, an ex-OSS. I believe that we're developing an argument that actually they met with Yves Fortier, who would have been in a position, he had the opportunity to coordinate the assassination of JFK 5 years later.
Yeah, right? And I mean, that's another show almost over there, but it's important that we remember that Yves Fortier was on the board of directors of Nortel when all of this was happening. And it's just, yeah.
Let me just say, so what I would like to do with the Patreon part of the show is help our listeners, and I entreat them, because just like you and I are under this threat of being, shut down in our means of communication, if they come and help us in the Patreon part of the show, we can form, dare I say it, an educated minority up against, for example, the world's biggest propaganda broadcaster, BBC, with a weekly audience of 500 million people in 50 languages, right?
Yeah.
We can, as an antidote to that, produce what I believe can be brought into the courts as a set of facts that can be strung together where, let's say, the Patreon crowdsource, the truth movement becomes a very heavy and dangerous adversary of an online corrupt judicial elite. Over to you.
I have to stress that we are not offering any legal advice to anyone, and we are not compelling anyone to do anything.
Correct.
I think it's important that we let everybody know that if they watch the show and enjoy the show, people are free to do whatever they want, but we're not trying to enlist an army of litigants or get people to do anything. We just want people to know that if they're interested in this information, it's important that they become sponsors, because all the people that we're talking about, David, seem to be utilizing proxies. We don't have direct evidence that they're doing that, but it doesn't seem logical that the people that are persistently trying to destroy Crowdsource the Truth and thereby stifle your information, stifle Charles Ortel's information, stifle John Cullen's information, Mike Moore's information, the Moriartys, Ole Damagard, Diana West, everybody who appears on the show, they are being lashed out at by these operatives who are doing things in an effort to suppress people's ability to view this information and make up their own minds. So people who enjoy the show, people who want to see it continue, I urge you to become sponsors on patreon.com/reversecsi storyboards, subscribestar.com/reversecsi, or patreon.com/crowdsourcethetruth and subscribestar.com/crowdsourcethetruth. It's more important than ever. There is such a persistent effort to shut the show, the channel, my business, my life down, you've got to join and sponsor the show if you want it to persist. I hope people will do that. We'll be back in just 10 minutes. See everybody on Patreon and Subscribestar. Thanks for watching.